Radio Cairo, FM 95.4. The Voice of Egypt.
It's 4 o'clock in Radio Cairo. This is World of Info. We're coming live from Studio 3, FM 95.4. My name is Dr. Amr Mabrouk. Dua Muhammad is at the control, and our direct line number is 2578-9407. And today is a very special day because we have a dear friend and a real distinguished diplomat who's been serving here in Cairo for almost the past 4 years. And he is His Excellency Ambassador Greg Lewis, Ambassador of New Zealand in Cairo. And definitely he's more than welcome to come in his second home, if we use the expression, Radio Cairo, because he has given us the honor of being here in our program twice before, and this time as the final time as an ambassador in Cairo. But definitely he is more than welcome whenever he stops again in Cairo to be a distinguished guest in our program. Sir, thank you very much for coming and having the time for us in your busy schedule.
Thank you, Dr. Amr, and thank you for having me again today. It's a real honor and a privilege to be back here, and greetings to all the listeners out there.
Definitely, it's very nice to have an idea and to have a chit-chat with an ambassador, a seasoned diplomat who has a degree in biology and law, undergraduate degree, and a master's degree in biomedical ethics and health law, with a short tenure in the health service of New Zealand. And after that, he joined the Foreign Service, where he worked in Riyadh twice, in Cairo twice. This is his second time, in Baghdad, in Abu Dhabi. So he's a specialist in the Middle East region, specialist, an Arabist, but he doesn't want to say it. This is a secret we can share now with our listeners, because in the beginning you wouldn't share this idea that he's a very fluent understanding in Arabic, reading Arabic, writing Arabic, and even an Arabic with a good accent. It's not Syrian, it's not Damascus side, it's Egyptian, right? Amr Masriya, of course. And this is a secret that we are going to share with our listeners about experience of His Excellency Ambassador Greg Lewis, Ambassador of New Zealand in Cairo, just after the break. So, His Excellency Ambassador Greg Lewis, we'd like to talk about your distinguished country. It's in the South Pacific Ocean, and because of its remoteness, it was one of the last lands to be settled by humans, as written in different sources. So the Maoris didn't come from the pre-dynastic area of Egypt, for example, or the early centuries after the Christ. They just came in the 11th or the 12th century, and Europeans joined them in the 17th century. So how far is New Zealand blessed by its geography? Is it a bless or a curse?
That's a good question. And I think in many respects it's blessed by our geography. I think once upon a time New Zealand was a long way away, and I often joke with friends and colleagues, and I say that, you know, when you have small children and you put them to bed at night, you start with the story as you put them to bed. You say, once upon a time, in a land far, far away, and that's New Zealand.
So even far away than Chile, right?
It is a far, far away. But the thing is, you know, it doesn't feel so geographically distant today. I think the tyranny of distance that we used to talk about in the past is no longer applicable to today. We've got, you know, you can have teleconferences. You can be in New Zealand within a day. You know, the impact of the distance isn't the same as what it was previously. You know, in many respects, I think the geographical distance and the fact that New Zealand has been an isolated landmass for a long time has also been very important for New Zealand too. Like you talked about the Maori arriving, and they arrived about 1250 to 1300 AD. The Europeans, I think it was Abel Tasman, rediscovered New Zealand in 1642. So human expansion into New Zealand has been quite a recent development in terms of our history. But it's meant that our flora and our fauna, our forests have all been pretty much protected and still remain very virgin and very lush. So our natural environment has not had the same impact as many other countries.
It was not abused by the citizens of New Zealand, whether Maoris or Europeans.
Well, we have had some issues in terms of native species that have become extinct because of overhunting, particularly if, given the fact New Zealand's been given the fact that we broke away from Gondwana land so early, a lot of our birds are flightless. So they haven't had any natural predators until the arrival of humans. So those species were particularly vulnerable. Now, of course, we have cats and possums and stoats that will hunt our native birds. But previously, before that, it was untouched. And I think, New Zealand today is a country in the Pacific Ocean of just over 5 million people, but a land mass that's larger than the United Kingdom. We're about the same size as Japan, but a lot of our area is beautiful forests, beautiful lakes, and these
no much deserts.
We do have a desert area in the central plateau of New Zealand in the central North Island. It's not like the desert here.
It's not like Australia, for example, which has huge deserts. Right?
No, so New Zealand's climate's very temperate as well. So we get a lot more rain compared to parts of Australia. So it's meant that the lush vegetation's been able to continue to grow in New Zealand. So I think as I was saying, the impact of humans on our environment has been a lot less than other parts of the world. And we've been able to learn from others as well. We've learned, for example, I know Wellington, our capital, for example, there's what they call the Green Belt, an area where development is not allowed to continue. So there's this tree and bush area where you actually cannot expand the city because they want to keep the lungs of the city. They want to keep it healthy for the city's citizens. So I think, given the fact we've been geographically distant, we have arrived later, and we've brought a lot of the wisdom that other people have learned along through time to the development of our cities and our areas.
So definitely this is very interesting because to have people living in these new areas, but we have a certain question that has to be asked. I mean, the capital is named Wellington, and Wellington, of course, is the famous Duke Wellington, right? The famous commander of the British Army, a man who was very distinguished, having Irish roots. He himself was not English, but he was British, probably one of the most eminent generals. He was the one who defeated Napoleon, and he was a Duke, Wellington, and he lived for quite a long time. But why the capital was called under his name?
Why is it called Wellington? Again, I think this is part of our history and post-colonization as well. The Maori, who are our indigenous people, they arrived first, and they had place names for all these places as well. Poniki, we call, is the word for Wellington. Whanganui Aotearoa. There's a real shift and a movement in New Zealand now to recognise the indigenous place names and to use them along with the settler names as well. In fact, even in the last couple of years, there's been a resurgence of the use of Aotearoa New Zealand, because Aotearoa, which is a Maori word, which means the land of the long white cloud, is the indigenous name for New Zealand. So using them together, we're using both the Maori word and also the English word for the country as well. So in terms of place names, there is this movement towards more indigenous names, back to the original, or alternatively to recognise indigenous Maori heroes and people from folklore and others who might be important to different parts of the country.
When we talk about Maoris, we find that you have treated, the Europeans who came in 1645 onwards, treated the Maoris in a different way than what happened in Australia, your neighbor, and there was a lot of mix and match between the Maoris and the natives. We can call them the natives of New Zealand, and the Europeans who came. And you were kind enough to tell me that almost all of the New Zealanders have some Maori blood in them, more or less. It's a big percentage of them, right?
I don't know if all New Zealanders would have Maori blood, but I think certainly Maori have intermarried with non-Maori.
Yes.
And you're right. I think historically the Crown did work differently, or did engage differently with
not
the
like
Maori
what
people.
happened to the Aborigines.
Well, we had a Treaty of Waitangi that was signed in 1840, which gave special permissions to the Maori, and for them to grant the extension of sovereignty to New Zealand. Now, it wasn't always easy. In fact, unfortunately, looking back with hindsight, a lot of things were done wrong as well. We had Maori land. We had the Maori land wars in the 1860s.
Yes, that's what I was just going to bring up.
Yeah, due to the probably the misgovernance of by the government, or the way that they weren't able engage with the Māori in a fair and proper relationship that was based on partnership. I think today the government is a lot more aware of the need for this partnership, the need for protection of Māori treasures and Māori culture and heritage, and I think that recognition is definitely shining through a lot more brightly and being embraced by New Zealanders because we see it as being important. It's important for us for our cultural identity, and it's important for us as a nation as we continue to grow and create our own national identity as well.
I notice with a great respect that you are an expert in the Maori's language, and a lot of New Zealanders might not have a lot of Maori blood or very small traces of Maori blood in their veins, yet they like to learn the language. They are proud of using the language, and I find that completely different than what happened in Australia and other countries. So, how far is the Maori's language being embedded or of a great interest in the minds of the New Zealanders of today?
Sure. Well, I studied Māori language when I was a child. I was encouraged by my parents. I studied through school, high school, college, and at university as well. But that was when it was less common. Now, Māori language is an official language of New Zealand. We have Māori language television stations, and Māori is being promoted and spoken as much as possible, and particularly in government as well, as we try to increasingly promote it so that it becomes a vibrant and important part of our cultural identity.
Almost of the 5 million people, how many do you think are speaking the Maoris now?
I think there are more people who are speaking. I'm not sure of the exact statistics, but I think people are a lot more comfortable now with using Māori language. Perhaps maybe 10 or 15 years ago, people might have been a bit embarrassed or a bit shy, or they felt that they weren't comfortable in doing it. I think there's a lot greater acceptance and a willingness to go out and to learn it and to use it, because it is part of our cultural identity. We are a Pacific country, and as the government, as a government representative, I acknowledge the importance of promoting the Māori language as much as possible. Here, for example, if I'm in Cairo, if I'm giving speeches, I'll always start with an appropriate.
This is what I
Māori,
really respected you. Any event that you kindly invited us to the New Zealand premises, you always had a short speech of Māori. You spoke in Māori with your colleagues in the embassy, and even with your MFO colleagues, the New Zealander MFO colleagues who hold army ranks, and most of them are Caucasians, but yet you spoke with them in Maoris, as I've noticed in our meetings.
Many of them understand too.
Yes.
Yeah.
So this is a really great interest, because 1907 is the year that New Zealand became a dominion. And this was almost 47 years after the 1860 skirmishes and war with the Maoris. And it took some years for the country to become well established. What was the main milestone for the people of New Zealand to become familiar of this country as a nation and as their own nation? They are not just subordinates of an empire.
Of Mother England.
Mother UK.
That's an excellent question, and I think different people may have different views in terms of what were the key milestones for New Zealand. And I think it's probably worth highlighting that New Zealand, like all countries, continues to evolve, and our national identity continues to mature and to evolve as well. I think for many New Zealanders, we talk about Anzac Day, which is the 25th of April. It's our national memorial day, and it signifies a battle which was fought in World War I between New Zealand and the Australians and some other forces, the British, Indians and Canadians, trying to invade what is current-day Turkey. And
the Gallipoli
campaign, exactly right. So Anzac, Australian New Zealand Army Corps, but we called that a really important day because it helped to define us, and it was a battle that we lost, I should add. It's a battle that helped to define us as a nation. We learnt comradeship, we learnt mateship, we learnt.
They were called the Anzac, right?
They were called the Anzacs, yeah. And I think it was a time when I think a lot of people woke up and they realised, why are we fighting these battles for a country on the other side of the planet? And it created a lot of reflection. A lot of people. There's a lot of post-war poetry, for example, which talks about the development of a national identity post that particular battle, and how that sort of evolved into what we see ourselves as today.
I read the book of Gallipoli, and it's like the Bible of Gallipoli, and it talked about the expedition. It talked about the crime of Winston Churchill, who tried to end World War I with a very chaotic plan that never worked, and how this worked even on the other side, because the commander-in-chief of the army there was no one but Mustafa Kemal, who was later on named as Mustafa Kemal Ataturk, the father of the new Turks. And definitely he was a brilliant commander, and he was able to form up very strong defensive lines that were able to prevent the Anzac and the Brits from going inland. And of course there were a lot of Egyptians who shared in this unfortunate battle as carriers and as underdogs. So this carries a lot of bad memories for both sides, whether these were the Brits, the New Zealanders, or the Australians, and even the Turks, and of course the Egyptians. So when we look at this particular period, there's nothing romantic about it.
No, there's nothing romantic about war at all.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes,
if anything, I think war is you know, in the hindsight of war, it's reflecting about what have we learned from this. And I think, you know, I mean, you referenced Ataturk as well, and I think he was particularly gracious after that battle. And there's some very moving words up at Gallipoli, in Çanakkale, up in Turkey, where they talk about, you know, mothers, wipe away your tears because your sons are now lying in the bosom of a friendly country type thing. You know, and I think that battle and those commemorations, they will link New Zealand and Turkey, you know, forevermore as you know, both in grief for the loss.
It was an explosion of poetic experience from both sides, and I remember that not only the New Zealanders and Australians have written poetry and literature about this period. On the other side, the Turks have done publication recently of a lot of the works and a lot of the letters that were sent by people who have wasted or lost their lives on the hills of Gallipoli. So that's why I really look at this period of how war can sometimes have small positive things like this, and making a nation define itself in a very crucial moment. So the nation developed its new moment, and it became a developed country. New Zealand ranks highly in the international comparison of national performance, such as the quality of life, the health, the education, the protection of civil liberties, and economic freedom. How was that possible? What's the secret of success? Give us a recipe, please.
The secrets of success. Well, I think you know, different countries have different methods of achieving this kind of success. But I think for New Zealand, one of the benefits for us is that we do have a very open and transparent government. You know, we have what's called the Official Information Act, and so anyone in New Zealand can request government documents, which may be redacted, but they can still put in a request for them. So that encourages people to participate in government, whether it's our national government level or if it's at local government level. Public participation in the democratic process is something which is very alive and very active. Everybody feels as though they've got something at stake. Everybody feels as though they have a right to participate in an opportunity to have their voices heard. And I think that's probably been something which has promoted these achievements and enabled us to achieve good outcomes for New Zealanders, because everybody feels as though that they're involved and that they've got some skin in the game, as would say.
So definitely, this is really very interesting how it was able to have a secret of success. And of course, if we talk about New Zealand and this hardship period, we have to talk about COVID. COVID has been a global crisis. How did New Zealand deal with it? I mean, they blocked the borders, right?
We did, yeah.
And even you yourself were not allowed in sometimes.
Yeah, that's very true. That's very true.
Yes, I remember that.
Yeah, it was a very challenging time, I think, for everybody globally. Yeah. You know, I think one of the things New Zealand did early on in the pandemic, as our Prime Minister at the time said, we went hard and we went early, and excuse me, and by that we closed our borders very soon after COVID was identified, and basically we had quarantine facilities. So if people were travelling into New Zealand, or only New Zealanders or New Zealand residents could travel into the country, and they'd have to do 2 weeks of quarantine. So after...
So for somebody like you who has a vacation of 2 weeks, then you're better off to stay in
better
Cairo.
off to stay in Cairo. Absolutely right. So at the start of the pandemic, we did have COVID, and then we went into a hard lockdown for 7 weeks. And then once we eliminated COVID from the country, we had this very strict quarantine period with the quarantine facilities to
So
keep
you
it
didn't
out.
lose much lives in the COVID crisis.
Not initially, yeah. So we were very fortunate. As I mentioned, our population's 5 million and our landmass is larger than the UK. So maintaining social distance is something which is much easier to do in New Zealand than it is here in Cairo, for example. A lot of people were able to work from home, so they didn't have to go into office buildings and skyscrapers or whatever and spend time with colleagues, so they could actually socially distance and keep the rates of transmission low. So while COVID ravaged the planet, for a lot of the pandemic, we were very fortunate and very lucky to have no COVID in New Zealand. In August of last year, though, however, the very virulent variants of Delta and then later Omicron arrived in New Zealand, and we had an escape from our quarantine facilities. I understand there was somebody was collecting their food from outside their quarantine room, and just through the passage of air into the corridor, the virus sort of moved out, and then somebody who was about to be released back into the public breathed it in and then transmitted it. So we had community transmission from August of last year of those two variants. Fortunately, by that stage, we had been able to vaccinate a large percentage of the population. I think it was about 92%, which is very high. And we're also very fortunate as well that it was the softer variants of COVID-19. So not the initial earlier ones that we saw such devastating and horrific images of people in hospitals, but the, if I can say, lighter versions of Omicron, which have a less severe reaction.
So definitely this was a story of success. So let's go back to your tenure. I mean, you served here twice in Egypt. The first time as a DCM, Deputy Chief of Mission, from 2009 to 2011. And I think you have had the experience of a very strange experience at the time. Because when you came in 2009, this was what they call the 10 kilograms post,
Yes.
where nothing was happening. And all what you're doing is going to diplomatic functions and having good food and good meals and enjoying one of the safest places on earth. And then suddenly in 2011, there was a revolution, there was a lot of change, and suddenly you were a very busy man, right?
I was a very busy man. In fact, we were a very busy embassy. We were also accredited to Libya as well. So,
you have seen the old versions of the Arab Spring, right?
Yes, indeed. Yeah. So the time in 2011 was very profound.
So you stayed from January. I mean, when did you leave? The end of 2011.
It was end of 2011.
So you have seen the whole show, right? More or less.
Saw the whole show.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And a fascinating time. I remember my first year here. I would say it's business as usual diplomacy, as you say. Going out to meetings, promoting trade, promoting cooperation, working out how we can better advance our relationship with Egypt. And then in the second year, it was, okay, what does this mean for Egypt? What does this mean for our relationship with Egypt? What does it mean for New Zealand and our interests? And it was a very, very fascinating time to be here. A time of profound change, one which I look back on with my Egyptian friends almost in awe as I contemplate the changes that happened that year. We became very busy.
Suddenly in 2011.
Yeah, and I remember going home after the posting and just being very tired. So just given the tempo of the work. So
yes.
Yeah.
So you came here again in 2019. That's 10 years later to start a new tenure, and less than 10 years, of course, from the last time you've been here. And you served as an ambassador, which is different role, different tasks. The DCM is usually having a lot of administrative work. Which is not fun at all, because the ambassador is the one who's holding all the keys of the bilateral relations, and the DCM is the one who's responsible for maintaining the coordination and applying the orders or the instructions of the ambassador. So suddenly there's a change of role, and you are the one who is under the limelight, and you came to Egypt. So tell us about this experience.
Yeah, I think coming back to Egypt, given the fact that my last posting was it was towards the end of the Mubarak period and the revolution. There were, a few memories, I guess, and a few sort of attitudes I had to sort of shift, because I realised there was the new Egypt. It was a new, like, water had got passed under the bridge and things had changed. Of course, moving into a people leadership role in an embassy is very different, as you say, from being the DCM. You're managing a team, you're ensuring the good stewardship of the bilateral relationship, wanting to see that things improve on both sides, and finding opportunities of where you can actually advance political engagement or trade engagement or people-to-people linkages. So the focus definitely was very different. Egypt itself has also changed, though, too. One thing which really struck me in 2019 when I came back is how much larger Cairo was.
Yes.
The new cities, Sheikh Zayed, Degamo, and others. Medinati. All of these places. I don't recall them. They may have been being built at the time when I left, but they were now fully functional and up and running, and the development and infrastructure had really taken off, and the city had expanded. A lot of it had become a lot more modern as well, and I think that's something which it strikes me every time I hear the stats about the expansion of Egypt's population. I think it's 2.5 million people are added to the population every year, which in the course of my 4 years here, that's twice the size of New Zealand.
Yes, exactly. Yes, so and how far do we see the changes?
I think the changes have been profound. I think there's been a lot of things which have been happening. In addition to the infrastructure that is being built, I think Egypt's a lot more assertive country now as well. One of the things which I've been really pleased to see is, of course, this great big climate change summit, which is being held this month in Sharm el-Sheikh, and the global leadership role that Egypt's taking as part of that too. So I'm really delighted to see that. I think that's it's Egypt, showing itself on the world stage and projecting itself as both the regional and global leader. So I think that's
so you're
important.
taking part, and I mean, 2 days from now you'll be, or tomorrow or after tomorrow you'll be heading to Sharm el-Sheikh, right?
Hoping to find out. I won't be heading to Sharm el-Sheikh the exact dates, but New Zealand definitely will be participating in there. We have delegates who have started to arrive into Sharm el-Sheikh already. In fact, we've had a couple arrive a few days ago. We have more arriving tonight and over the next few days. We have ministers who will be attending as well. Obviously, COP27 is a massive undertaking and an opportunity for the global family to get together and to discuss what is really one of the largest existential threats which is facing our species. So we're definitely keen to see this as a success. We want to be productive and to engage with Egypt and other countries to ensure that we can move forward in the most sustainable and appropriate way in order to save our climate.
So, of course, we are really enjoying the talk with His Excellency Ambassador Greg Lewis, Ambassador of New Zealand in Cairo. And after the break, we'll talk more about Egyptian-New Zealand relations and, of course, Egypt in the hindsight and in the back of the minds of New Zealanders. So, after the break, stay tuned with us to Radio Cairo. So, still listening to the World of Info and we are really distinguished, having the distinguished guest, His Excellency Ambassador Greg Lewis, Ambassador of New Zealand to Cairo. And you're talking about New Zealand in the memory of New Zealanders, Egypt in the memories of the New Zealanders, because all the Europeans who settled in New Zealand mostly have passed through the Suez Canal.
Yes.
So most of them, whether they have written their own biographies of how they settled in New Zealand, they always started, for example, whether they were living in UK, Britain or France or wherever, they would say that we have taken up a boat and we went through the Suez Canal and we passed through the Red Sea and went to New Zealand, right? And suddenly there were also the New Zealanders who went to war in the World War I and in World War II. They passed through Egypt and they settled in for some time in Egypt, in Maadi in particular, and in the Western Desert, and in Galibri, and then back, and things like that. So tell us about Egypt in the biographies of these people who passed through New Zealand. Definitely you have a lot of to say, right?
I do. I always do.
Please.
Thank you. No, I think in terms of New Zealand's relationship with Egypt goes a long way back, and as you say, I think when it comes to the settlers, you're right. They did pass through the Suez Canal to get to New Zealand, the majority of them. I think for a lot of New Zealanders, it's probably the impact of World War One and World War Two, though, which is more perhaps in New Zealanders' memory for those today. Because those that passed through the Suez Canal perhaps are, generations past, whereas I think because of active remembrance of the wars, we do remember the campaigns where New Zealanders fought. In fact, in World War II, we had 70,000 New Zealanders pass through Cairo, which was about 7% of New Zealand's population at that time. Yeah. Which for those people who were lucky enough to survive the war and go home, they took back those memories of Egypt, of Cairo, and of Mahdi, as you've mentioned, and they sort of passed those stories down through their children and their grandchildren. I know, for example, even today, there's a schoolboy rowing competition in the South Island of New Zealand called the Mahdi Cup. And it's a tradition which continues. It's annual, and it's based on the races that occurred on the Nile during World War II. And the trophy of that particular that competition is a propeller of a World War II aircraft that was here in Egypt. So, we have lots of little sort of, I guess, cultural anchors that bring us back to Egypt. I think for younger generations, it's the traditional majesty and magic and allure of Egypt. It's ancient history that
tell us, in school you studied about ancient Egyptian history.
I did, yeah, absolutely. I remember doing when I was a small child, doing some study on Egypt. So it's part of the general social studies curriculum. So it is something which New Zealand children are exposed to as they grow up. And I think for a lot of people, it's those sort of early school exposures that sort of light a fire in people. They think, I'd like to visit Egypt. I'd like to come and check out the pyramids. I'd like to see Aswan or Abu Simbel or Luxor or Iskandaria, all these amazing cities around the country because of what they were exposed to when they were much smaller.
I remember, for example, that whenever you go there and you see how far some New Zealanders, of course, at that time in the 30s and the 40s, especially in the 40s, it was very easy to climb the pyramid using a guide. So I believe you have a lot of photos on your national archives of New Zealanders standing on the top of the pyramid, and how these photos in particular have affected the memorabilia of the generations to follow, right?
Yeah, indeed. In fact, in our embassy here in Cairo, we have some photos of what was in the NZEF, which is the precursor to today's New Zealand Defence Force. And you're right, there's photos of them at the pyramids, there's photos of them at Mahdi Camp. And it harks back to a very different age, and a very different Egypt as well. But it reminds us that our history with Egypt runs deep, and it's embedded in strong cultural and historical ties.
And New Zealand, of course, the part of these soldiers and officers, this Egypt for them is their final resting place. So I believe some of them are buried in the cemetery in Heliopolis, or in Ismailia, or in El Alamein, right?
That's right. In fact, I was up in El Alamein.
I've seen a picture of yours placing a flower wreath on El Alamein memorial, right?
So we have about 1,300 New Zealanders who are buried up at El Alamein.
1,300?
1,300, yeah. And of course, it's very sobering when you walk around the Commonwealth War Cemetery at El Alamein, because a lot of the names and the ages in particular are quite striking. People who are in their early 20s, who have travelled from a country which was very geographically distant at that time, to a faraway land to fight for king and country, and died defending what they believe with the values of freedoms and the fight against the Nazis. And you think these were people who were probably definitely very young, but from the farms, from the villages, from the mines, from very, I would probably say, basic, simple backgrounds. heading off on this great adventure to a far off exotic land, where they ultimately paid the ultimate price and perished. So, for me here as ambassador, I always make sure that when we have our remembrance, that we do, go up and we honour their memories. And as you say, we've also got people buried out at Heliopolis.
Heliopolis are mostly the soldiers that unfortunately died in hospitals over there near Cairo, right?
That's right. Yeah, and then there's also Al Fustat. There's a Commonwealth War Graves Cemetery.
This is World War One or Two?
World War II. I think there's both from there.
Because Egypt was the biggest hospital for the Gallipoli expedition. I remember in the First World War, the Gallipoli expedition sent the wounded, because they didn't have enough space that they were occupying in Gallipoli, through hospital ships to be treated in Egypt, in Cairo and Alexandria. So you have a cemetery also in Cairo, in Fustat and Heliopolis.
In Heliopolis, yeah, and they're both looked after by the Commonwealth War Graves Commission, and they're very beautiful, very peaceful resting places.
Quite near to my home. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So going out there, it's always a very sort of somber opportunity to walk amongst the graves and just to remember.
Mm-hmm. So it's not just the end of it, because New Zealand armed forces are taking part in the MFO. So they are working hand in hand with the Egyptian army to maintain the Camp David Accord in Sinai, and they're doing a good job. And even the commander-in-chief of the MFO now is a New Zealander general, right?
That's right, Major General Evan Williams.
Yes.
Yeah.
So tell us about that. I mean, they have been here for the past 40 years almost.
We have, yeah. So since the MFO was created, New Zealand's been a partner country, along with the 13 other troop contributing countries. We believe that the MFO is a very positive peace support operation, and we're very grateful to the Egyptian government for their confidence in the New Zealand Defence Force leading the MFO at this time. So the Major General, he's been in Force Command since December 2019, so he's had quite an interesting time during the COVID period, and then he'll conclude his tenure next year. But New Zealand's very much committed to the MFO. We had our Defence Minister visit Egypt about 3 weeks ago, and the Honourable Pene Henare, and he reiterated to Defence contacts here, of Defence government contacts, that New Zealand would remain committed to the peace support mission. So I think as long as the MFO is needed, New Zealand will be here.
So did New Zealand take any part also with the blue hats or the blue caps, blue berets in the United Nations? Or
yeah, so we're an active peacekeeping.
Yes, peacekeeping forces were.
Yeah, so we have a number of missions. We they differ from time to time. We don't have I know I think UNSO is our longest serving peace support mission. MFO is certainly up there as well with 40 years. And I know we do a lot of work with Egypt, which is another prominent peace support or peacekeeping nation as well. And just recently we joined up with the Triple CPA and did some peace. Some Mormon peace and security training for Middle Eastern peacekeepers. So just in terms of UN Security Council Resolution 1325. So in terms of the peacekeeping efforts, it's not just boots on the ground, but also helping to train other countries to ensure that they're as effective as they can. And so one thing I'm really pleased about is the partnership that we've been able to engage with Egypt in order to train peacekeepers from this part of the world so they can be more effective as well.
So when we talk about this period, we have to talk also about the cooperation in the field of economics, which is one of the most important tasks that you have taken on your shoulders to improve the connection between Egypt and New Zealand. So how far is the exports and imports and the scale of cooperation between Egypt and New Zealand?
It's growing, but it can do better.
This is the same thing that you said last year, right?
Yeah, well, I must say since last year, bilateral trade's increased by $100 million. So I'm very pleased with that. And I think that also comes at a time of considerable economic challenges for the world, as we have supply chain problems, as we have containers that can't get to destinations in time for various purposes, and we have inflationary pressures and all these sorts of other sort of bottlenecks in terms of trade. So you're right, we are very active in terms of promoting bilateral trade. We're about $400 million in trade from New Zealand to Egypt. It's our largest trading partner now in Africa. So obviously the message about opportunities in Egypt is...
So what is New Zealand exporting to Egypt?
Primarily dairy products. So you'll have seen New Zealand butter on the shelves of supermarkets. There's the Anchor brand, which is a partnership between New Zealand's largest dairy company, Fonterra, and the Saka Group, which is based up in Alexandria. So we're very proud of that. It provides jobs for Egyptians, and it's a good investment program into Egypt. We're also looking at other areas too. We had the introduction of Manuka honey into the market a couple of years ago.
Tell us about the secret of Manuka, because it's a special flower, right?
It is, yeah. So the Manuka flower is a New Zealand native plant, and so the Manuka honey, it's a honey which has medicinal benefits. So a lot of people will put, say, Manuka honey on wounds. If they have stomach conditions, they'll take the Manuka honey. It has antibacterial, antiviral properties. There are other claims about Manuka honey which I can't verify, but but it's certainly a honey which is good for you, and that's been scientifically proven. And
the flower cannot be cultivated anywhere else than in New Zealand?
I think they have one similar in Australia as well. Yeah.
But of course not the same quality.
No, exactly right, Dr. Amr.
Exactly, because you're extremely biased, that's all. That's normal. So when we talk about that, I mean, one of my patients was reminding me today when I told her that we're having a discussion with the New Zealand ambassador, said, I used to listen to an advertisement about New Zealand cheese back in the 90s and late 80s, about how New Zealand cheese is so special, really. So you've been here in the market for quite a long time, right?
We have, absolutely. I think our trading relationship with Egypt continues to grow and evolve. As I said, it's primarily in the dairy space, including with cheese, and some meat products too. But we're always looking for opportunities where we can expand and diversify our trade, but not only from sending products from New Zealand to Egypt, but also looking at what we can send the other way too. I've been working very hard with Ambassador Dina El-Sehi and her team in Wellington to look at opportunities of what Egyptian exporters might want to send to New Zealand.
So what are Egyptian exporters giving now to sending to?
There's all sorts of things, from some nitrates and fertilizers to ceramics to fruits and things as well. So we had 2020 we signed off an export plan for Egyptian oranges to go to New Zealand, and then earlier this year we signed off on general citrus to go to New Zealand. So basically, in terms of New Zealand's markets, we're now able to bring in a lot more of Egyptian fruits. I know our Ministry of Primary Industries is looking at a number of other fruit products, including table grapes and Egyptian mangoes, which are particularly good.
Yes, because I've seen you on Instagram posting about the mango festival in Ismailia, right?
I was very honoured. I was invited up to the inaugural mango festival in Ismailia. Yes. Yeah, it was a wonderful opportunity.
It's beautiful, but it is a bit dangerous if you eat more, right?
Well, they're very good. They're very, as you say, very Moorish.
Yes.
But we had our defence minister here a few weeks back, as I mentioned, and I made sure that he tried some mangoes whilst he was here, and I sent out a tweet of him.
Some of these mangoes came
juice.
with Ahmed Arabi from his exile years in Sri Lanka, or in Ceylon. At that time it was called Ceylon. And so he brought a lot of trees from there, and it was swarming in Egypt. And
they've done very well. Absolutely.
They're doing very well, right?
Yeah.
It seems that the start type of semi-desert soil in Ismailia and in Sharqiya governorates is very helpful for the mango's taste, right?
And it's been a very good year for them this year too.
Yes,
yeah.
I know that. Yeah. I mean, you have a glittering eyes, Excellency. So, since we talked about certain personal things about your experience in the Mango Festival, we have to ask you a question, which definitely you've been asked always every day. What did you like best in Egypt? And I know this saying. What is their favorite dish? And of course, this is not that important to us to ask, but just to share the experience, because you have had the time sometimes because of your work and your job to go in different places of Egypt. So tell us about your reflection about your tenure. It's not, I mean, we're not just talking how great the pyramids are or how beautiful Siwa was, but definitely this you become part of the place.
You
This
do.
is the idea.
You do.
This is the idea. The more you visit areas, the more this place becomes part of you and part of your memory, because we always, in the end, this is what we remember. What we remember is the places that we've gone and the people that we have met. Tell us about this Egyptian experience.
I think you're right. I think, like if I reflect back on my postings to Egypt, the hardest thing is of any posting is leaving.
Yes.
Because you do become part of the community. You do become part of the fabric of the society that's here, and you build up amazing friendships and amazing memories. I think for me, the take home, which I always have, is just the generosity, the friendliness, and the warmth of spirit of Egyptians. I love Egyptian sense of humor. I love the fact that you can be talking to somebody and then you're having a cup of tea with them 10 minutes later, or it's a very warm, very gregarious, very friendly society, and I think that's something which Egyptians should cherish and protect as well, particularly in times when there's some when there are external pressures on that sort of thing, because I think the importance of family is something which resonates very strongly with me and with New Zealanders as well. But it's the people. We have a saying in Maori language in New Zealand: "He aha te mea nunui o te ao, he tangata, he tangata, he tangata." What's the most important thing in the world? It is people. It is people. It is people. And I think for people who do come to Egypt, for people who come to experience the place, it's their engagement with Egyptians, which is the most important. Yes, it's against amazing backdrops of the pyramids or Abu Simbel or Abydos or Dendera or whatever place they've visited. But more often than not, when I talk to people, it's, we had this amazing tour guide. He was able to tell us this, or she was able to tell us that, and they were so helpful, they were so friendly. It's that real warmth of spirit of Egypt, which I think people take with them when they leave, and that's certainly something which I will take with me when I leave as well.
And maybe I think we should add to that is when you look at the stones, I mean, when you look at the streets of Cairo, the mosques that you see, and the tombs and the Sabil Kutab and all these things, you have to think of the builders of this, and you have to think the people behind the stones, because behind every stone in Egypt there is a story to be told.
For sure.
And this is the problem: is that people look at the pyramids and don't feel that these all anonymous people who built it were believers or had a belief, or whether this belief was right or wrong, but this belief put them into the route to perfection, and this is something to be admired. So definitely expressing your feelings or experiencing the feelings of the people behind the stone is very, very important.
And I think also with Egypt, or with Cairo especially, such a majestic city as well. And I think, every now and then you need to stop and pinch yourself and say that you are actually part of that history of the city as well, which, it's a long legacy which stretches right back through time, and you're part of that current contemporary narrative that is Cairo today. So for all the listeners out there, they are part of, part of the history that it makes Cairo great.
Because I think that you'll definitely cherish the moment that you sat for some meditation at Sultan Hassan Mosque, or when you looked from the majestic scenery from the citadel, from the police museum, to examine the Cairo that lies at your footsteps, or the pyramids in the distant background looking majestically at you, and
the city of possibilities.
Yes, and the Sphinx who's just having his eternal smile as you are passing around, and said, a lot of people like you passed by me. I'm still here, but they're not. So this is really a very amazing experience. Tell us about, we talked about the stone and the people behind the stones, but there was also something that you mentioned to me before we went on air, which is the nature, the mother nature. You've been to Siwa.
I have,
and you've been to the Red Sea. Tell us about this experience, because you have chosen two places to talk about, and I will not say the names. You will tell me. Tell me about your experience in these two places.
Yeah, so being a New Zealander, I have a great love of the ocean. New Zealand, of course, is an islands nation, so we all grow up close to the sea. And for me, I was, always enjoyed fishing and ocean sports. So every chance I've had, I've tried to get down to the coast, down to the Red Sea. So I've been down to Hurghada, I've been to Dahab, Sharm el-Sheikh, and done a bit of kite surfing as well. But always enjoyed the opportunity to get out and to actually see some of Egypt beyond the capital. And that's always been, a real treat, a real opportunity which I've savoured. You mentioned Siwa as well. Siwa was a place I never got to in my first posting, and I know a lot of my friends and contacts haven't had an opportunity to get to Siwa given its distance. But Siwa is absolutely a jewel in Egypt. I've been blown away when I've been down there with the sights to see, from the Oracle of Alexander the Great, Cleopatra's Pool, the Salt Lakes. The opportunity to essentially to be floating in a lake. And the people being very kind and very generous.
Primitive, yes. And very hospitable.
Not necessarily primitive. I guess probably less worldly.
Yes.
But certainly the culture is very developed, and it's very very much focused on hospitality and generosity. So, and I think the geographical distance from Cairo, without having the hustle and bustle of a big city and the challenges of perhaps irregular cell phone reception and things, that's kind of nice. It's nice to escape that and to actually enjoy a more basic experience, which is refreshing and relaxing.
I mean, in your first tenure here, Egypt was famous for being the 10 kilograms post, where you can put on 10 kilograms because you enjoy the food. How was the food experience?
I think we all know the food experience is very good. Yeah. So no, I've definitely been very fortunate with enjoying the Egyptian kitchen. Yeah. The thing is, I have to be able to learn how to make the recipes, and to encourage others to sample them and try them.
Well, most of our visitors used to leave Egypt through Alexandria port. So before we leave and end our program, you just have to give us 2 words about Alexandria. What do you think of this majestic city?
I think you're right. It's a majestic city. It does sum it up. It's a beautiful city. I love going up to Alexandria. The ocean air, walking along the Corniche, just having it. Of course, it's Egypt's second city. Very different from Cairo.
Yes.
But just the warmth of the people, and the opportunity just to be on the Mediterranean and to enjoy a very different history from what is Cairo.
Yes.
Yeah, it's an amazing place.
Greco-Roman Alexandria, cosmopolitan Alexandria.
Very much so.
Lawrence Darrell Alexandria. So definitely just here, best regards to Alexandria, right?
Indeed.
Well, Excellency, time has come short for us, and we enjoyed your stay with us here in Radio Cairo, your stay with us here in Cairo, and we hope that you come soon to Egypt. Inshallah, next time will be the Secretary of State.
I have drunk from the Nile, as they say.
Yes. Well, we had the pleasure and honor to have with us His Excellency Ambassador Greg Lewis, Ambassador of New Zealand to Cairo, talking and reminiscing about his experience in Egypt. And we're very proud that he shared with us his private feelings and his experience about the Egyptian experience. And I would love that to read the book that you might write one day about Egypt. So this was the World of Info. We came live from Studio 3. My name is Dr. Amr Mabrouk. Dua Muhammad was at the control, and we had His Excellency Ambassador Greg Lewis, Ambassador of New Zealand in Cairo. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you for having me.
And we'll be seeing you next time, same station, Radio Cairo.